Bienvenue. Les aventures de Frank et Ben. Sixième série. Frank and Ben go on a picnic with Ruth and Sally. Neuvième histoire. Frank and Ben go on a picnic. Part 9. Tell the story of how you first met her and her friend Minot, Sally says to Ben. Ruth hasn't heard it. It happened the very first hour we were on the bus going from Winnipeg to Ottawa, Ben begins. We were just sitting in our seats and looking out the window when all of a sudden Genevieve and Minot, of course we didn't know them then, sat down in two seats across the aisle from us. We could see they weren't too happy about something, and then while we were thinking about this and asking ourselves a few questions, a guy came up to them from the back of the bus. In a very rough and impolite way, he started asking them why they had left their seats just as he and his friends were going to show them how they could have a good time on the bus. Later we found out exactly what he meant by this, but to explain it properly to you, I have to go back to when they were getting on the bus just after Genevieve and Minot had gotten on it. As they were walking down the aisle towards their seats at the back, they made a great to-do about having bought donuts and coffee for everyone on the bus. Imagine, they had brought back 4 big boxes of every kind of donut that could be bought in the Tim Hortons donut shop. As well as that, they had 2 big thermoses full of fresh coffee. They offered everyone, including Genevieve and Minot, donuts and coffee in paper cups that they themselves had brought on. So everything was kind of pleasant at first, except, to tell you the truth, Genevieve and Minot never really got caught up in the general festivities. They couldn't warm to these 3 guys, and like a lot of the other passengers, think they were great simply because they were passing out coffee and donuts. No, they kept a certain distance from them, even though it was clear from the beginning that one of the guys, the one that came up to them later on after they had changed their seats, was especially interested in Genevieve. He kept trying to get her attention in one way or another, but not only didn't she respond to anything he said or did, she absolutely refused to accept any coffee or donuts from him. On the other hand, Minot finally accepted a cup of coffee just to be polite. The next thing you know, after she'd only taken 1 sip from it, she was choking and gasping. "What do you mean?" asked Ruth. "What was wrong with the coffee?" "I guess it was spiked. That's the only thing that can explain it. Anyway, that's how they ended up sitting in the 2 seats across the aisle from Frank and me." At this point, the 3 friends are surprised to see the road ahead of them once again clogged with animals. "Cattle! Can you believe it?" exclaims Ben. "He must have escaped from some field." "They're all over the place. What a herd!" exclaims Sally. Once again, Ben is forced to slow down and, if not stop completely, let the car come to a crawl. Is Frank smiling? Is Frank still smiling?" Ben asks the girls. After looking over their shoulders, they both answer no. "Well, go on with your story," Ruth says finally. how did you and Frank get to know Genevieve and Minot? Well, like I said, the guy came up to them after they'd left their seats at the back and started giving them a hard time. Finally, Frank said to him, "Why don't you leave them alone? Can't you see they don't want to talk to you?" Then the guy turned to Frank and said, "And why don't you mind your own business?" After that, one thing led to another, and we almost got into a fight with him and his friends. "You forgot the part about Carlotta Hardbottom," Sally says. "She was the radical feminist on the bus sitting right in front of Frank and Ben. She got involved with the troublemakers too, and even confronted them at the next bus stop." But what's that got to do with how Frank and Ben got to know Genevieve and Minot? Well, because they all got to know Carlotta so well, and, well, isn't that the way it was, Ben? Kind of. It's really complicated. Then he says to Ruth, "Are you sure you want to hear this? Are you sure you want to hear all this?" Ruth looks around her and sees nothing but the backs of cows. She realizes it's turning into one of those days where it won't do her any good to get angry or impatient. What is it about this Carlotta Hardbottom that makes her so important? "Well, let me tell you," Sally exclaims. "She got into 2 big fights while she was on the bus. The first was with a passenger, and the second was with the bus driver. She got into 3 fights if you include the one with the 3 troublemakers," Ben adds. "And this is how you got to know Genevieve and Minot?" "She became a sort of topic of conversation on the bus." "Oh, really?" "Of course we talked about other things to Genevieve and Minot, but that's what really started off our first conversation." After Ruth has excused herself and, risking the company of the cows, gone out of the car to see how Frank is doing, Ben says to Sally, "Maybe I didn't explain it to her so well." "She's a bit touchy, you know," says Sally. "She thinks maybe you were making fun of that radical feminist."